more reaction to that bill and an update on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, we can cross to Bushra Khalidi, the West Bank policy lead for Oxfam. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And I do want to start by asking you about this new U.S. aid package for Israel. It does include some aid for Gaza. What do you think of it?
I mean, the U.S. Has cut $258 million for UNRWA. The level of devastation we're seeing in Gaza, the level of trauma, the level of starvation, where we have an entire civilian population at the brink of famine. There's very likely already pocket likes of famine in the north, because in order to have a famine declaration, you already need to have famine-like conditions to be able to make such a declaration, which has not yet been made, but has been warned that by May, if the situation does not improve, it's very likely that the IPC would be declaring famine in the north in Gaza. And I mean, to be selling arms to a government, any government or any party, and transferring lethal weapons that have caused the killing of almost 15,000 children. Yesterday alone, 14 children were killed in one airstrike in Rafah. And now with the Rafah military incursion that keeps on being threatened by the Israeli authorities and the IDF, I mean, what more? When does this stop? When does this onslaught, this carnage against an entire civilian population that, let me remind you, is trapped? They have nowhere to go. And they have no access to water. They have no access to electricity. They have no access to shelter. There's not enough humanitarian workers. It would take years to remove the rubble alone out of Gaza because of the level of devastation from the Israeli bombardment in the last 6 months. And to continue arming Israel after an ICJ decision that finds that there's a plausible risk of genocide, and a United Nations Security Council resolution that calls for an immediate and sustained ceasefire, and yet to continue arming Israel, from our opinion, risks complicity. These governments that continue to materially or diplomatically support Israel when it's, basically, there are atrocity crimes happening in Gaza, risk complicity and risk implicating themselves in the atrocity crimes that Israel's committing. There are clear legal obligations of these states that they should be taking in accordance with the ICJ, and we're not seeing these have a direct, we're seeing some improvement where we saw some shipments of food come into the north, which is very welcomed. But I mean, the situation is at such an unprecedented level of a catastrophe that we would expect much more from states to support the Palestinian civilian population in Gaza.
And you said that more aid has been getting in through the north. There was a lot of pressure put on Israel in the wake of the deaths of those aid workers from the World Central Kitchen. Has Israel been making good on all of its promises? And has the situation improved even slightly?
Well, there are hundreds of bakeries in Gaza and only 3 have reopened. So no, that's not enough. A couple of trucks are not going to meet the needs of an entire civilian population. And if, this is the narrative that is trying to be, painted, that is absolutely incorrect. Wastewater treatments have stopped working. There's sewage in the streets. We're not just talking about giving flour to people of Gaza. They deserve more than this. They deserve for their dignity to be restored. They deserve for their safety to be restored. They deserve to have access to clean water. They deserve to have a clean shower and access to a toilet. A few trucks coming into the north is not responding to those needs. Furthermore, people that have been at the brink of starvation, children that are starving, it's not an extra meal that they need. At this point, they need medical treatment. They need consistent care. They need consistent access to medical services, which are unavailable and do not exist. They only exist and are available for people that are suffering from traumatic injuries because of the relentless bombs that have been, sold by allies of Israel, including the U.S. And opening of crossing, there are 7 crossings into Gaza. Only 3 remained partially open. Operational hours, they committed to open the crossings for longer. We haven't seen that materialize either. There's, this entire narrative that there's so many trucks coming in, but the problem is that the trucks are only half full because Israel won't allow full trucks to come into Gaza because they need to be half full to be able to go through the verification process. The list continues. And it's farcical, really, that we're arming Israel while still, giving very limited access to humanitarian workers and humanitarian aid into Gaza.
And there are so many groups like yours that are advocating for more aid to be brought to Gaza, for a ceasefire to be put into place. What do you think it's going to take? Do you feel like you're being listened to?
Well, we've been working around the clock for the last 6 months trying to do this advocacy, like you said. We've been trying around the clock for the last 6 months to beg for a couple more trucks in. And so we're supposed to applaud when, a couple trucks are inside and we're unable to really deliver in safety. 6 World Central Kitchen workers have died, were killed in an Israeli airstrike, but actually 243 Palestinian humanitarian relief workers have been killed in the last 6 months. That is a huge capacity, human capital that we've lost, that we don't have that kind of human capacity to deliver and respond. These people are on the ground responding to people, that are severely in need. And we've lost those people due to the Israeli bombardments. And there's over 250 international organizations that have called for an arms embargo against Israel. And yet that call remains unheeded. What more should we be doing? We have continuously spoken out and put in joint statements, done joint media briefings to really ring the alarm bells. But again, nobody listens to the constituents. Nobody listens to civil society. That's what it feels like. It feels like our calls are really falling on deaf ears, and we have to fight for the smallest compromise.
All right, Bushra Khalidi, thank you again so much for giving us your time today. Again, that's Bushra Khalidi, the West Bank policy lead for Oxfam.